My studio is in a decommissioned law court, so it's really amazing when you walk into the space and it's this 1920s kind of courtroom with print workshops and print presses lying around, and that's where I do almost everything. My work is about narrative and site specificity. I love going to remote places and getting a sense of that space. I love learning about it, of conducting interviews with local conservationists, ecologists, galleries and archives, and finding out what these incredible spaces are, what they have been, what they mean, and that can be geologically, mythologically, in many different senses of what a place can be. Oh, it's devastating. I fell in love with it. I couldn't do anything else. I literally love the way print feels and looks and how you can separate the different layers and the transparency of the ink. There's something that really speaks to me with the medium and its application. And I love the challenge of it, of using the different chemistry and figuring out what the next layer is going to be or how I can change it. It's always a bit unpredictable. There is. It is very. It's odd. It's manual in one sense, and in the other sense, you do still sit in front of the screen and kind of edit things and process. I think it's this beautiful medium between paint and photography. So you still have the ability to get your hands in, to tear the paper, the plate presses into it, the ink is ripped out. There is something very, very textural about it. I got my MA in print at the Royal College of Art, and then previous to that I studied at Parsons in Paris, just doing fine art, general fine art. I think it's not exactly architecture. I'm really drawn to the stories of places, and whether that's architectural or whether that's in nature, I think it's finding these spaces that really have a story to tell. I grew up in Canada, and one of the things when I moved to Europe and to the UK is that everything is so much older, everything's so new in Canada, and it really felt quite amazing to be able to feel the history in spaces, and I think that's what I'm drawn to. Definitely. I think the story, when you move into nature, it's much more about geological time. So it's this idea of a time scale that's just so much longer than you, or especially because I work photographically, it's so much longer than any frame of the camera. And when I take an image, I do always think kind of what gets caught in that frame and what happens entirely outside of the frame. There's a whole other world. And so it's this idea of editing in the instant, but it's also kind of preserving at the same time. I think in terms, I always speak about my process as moving backwards. So a lot of my work will start digitally from the camera, from being on site out in these very remote spaces in the middle of nowhere. And then I bring these images back into the print room, and whatever place I take will speak. Kind of, I think it has a specific feeling and it evokes a specific emotion. And with that, I try and use the medium to recreate that sense I had in the place. So that can mean it kind of gets transformed into an etching. It can dictate the colors that are used, even the layering, the amount of colors. If then I monoprint over, which is a type of painting, kind of with the press. All of it is to try and bring the work back into the space and back into how I felt there. Yes, I think a lot of times I go to landscapes that are endangered or remote or kind of ephemeral in some way. So with Australia, there was this incredible idea of being in a space, of documenting a landscape that wouldn't exist in the same way in a few days. And that doesn't necessarily mean in a bad way, because there was regrowth, and then everything came back in a different way. It's just more of this circular nature. And with the tectonic plates, what fascinated me was how something as simple as a sentence, there are different landscapes from various tectonic shifts, but the immense variety of what comes out of that, of creating canyons, and from kind of canyon to canyon, you have these incredible, massive cacti that are multi-stories high, and then you move into the next canyon that is suddenly Jurassic and lush and not arid at all, but they're probably a few hours away from each other, and how these kind of pocket environments can exist and grow entirely on their own into these landscapes well, at least I've never seen before. And I think that's really wonderful to kind of show and preserve or eliminate. What was interesting with fault lines is actually one of the first works I've gone back to medium format analog photography. So it was bringing a whole different set of kit into these spaces. And one piece I really enjoyed, which I think I've titled Jurassic, is on this 120 film, and it was up the side of a volcano in Guadeloupe. And I remember trying to set up the shot, check the light, and then halfway through, right when I was about to press the button, an entire cloud came through, and the wind was just absolutely incredible. And so you kind of have this really incredible, almost fog feeling coming through in the image, penetrating. It creates almost like a blanket through the work. And I've named it Jurassic because the angles of the shot just felt so bizarre and almost so vertical, and I was sitting on the side of a cliff, and I thought, I don't even know what I'm doing here taking this image, but it was really quite spectacular. The peak is actually at the very top of this volcano in Guadeloupe, and there had been a hurricane in the few weeks before I arrived. And I think it was actually the piece that began this whole series, because what I found really amazing as I climbed up it, it was everything and nothing I expected a volcano to be, because it hadn't erupted in years, hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands. And so much had grown on top of it. The vegetation was incredibly lush, the megaflora was huge. You could see where the lava pools had, I guess, cooled, and how the moss had grown up. So you had this incredibly jagged landscape with these very organic kind of curves. And then as you got into the peak, you saw so many of these pits and calderas. It was so much more involved than I thought it was. And just as I took my steps onto the peak, the clouds went through and the entire thing got erased. And I stood there for over an hour and there was absolutely nothing. And I just thought it was spectacular, because you would never know this maze and network of lava flows that you could see from the top if you got there just the wrong time. And so the peak for me was this kind of amazing moment where it almost looks like you could be going skiing, or you could be in the snow, or you could be in the fog, or anywhere, but you would never imagine that you're on the top of a volcano in the Caribbean. Oh, I think it changes quite a bit actually. I do like Caldera, the very large one. I think there's the two very large portrait pieces. One I took at sunrise and one I took at sunset, and they're literally kind of 180 from each other. And what I found amazing about that is they're two completely different worlds, and all I did was pivot. And I think I really like that, because I'll always remember taking the shot. I think so. I think it is these massive changes in these landscapes. If it's turning, or if it's one crater over, if it's a minute too late or early. It's kind of like the same thing as when you have a camera, it's if you just take that image 1 second later, who knows what you'll get, or who knows what you missed. And in that sense, the landscape does really come alive, I think, in that moment. Yeah, I'm really excited about Fault Lines because it's the first body of work where I'm releasing a limited edition box set. And this is 16 etchings that basically typifies or exemplifies the journey that I actually went on, where it'll illustrate the places I went, the different fault lines, and kind of give more of a backstory to these various landscapes I've kind of put together. And what's exciting about that, I mentioned that this series is the first where I've gone back into analog photography in medium format, and with that I've also created a series of etchings made to look like negatives, or made to look like damaged negatives. So they have 2 layers of colour used to mimic kind of processing and chemical lines of analog photography, but even bringing it into a much older, even more mechanical process. So I think for me it's maybe referential or process-driven work I've done to date, which has always been a challenge and has been really fascinating to see how far I can push myself or what I could do next. Oh, the food. The castle. The coffee, sorry, not the castle. No, Newcastle's really exciting, actually. Every time I come here, I love it, and this is actually going to sound really cheesy, but I always describe it, I always had a love affair with Newcastle, and now I've never been here. But it's driving, or like pulling in from the train station and seeing all those bridges. It's like the scene from my favourite book. My absolute favourite book is Invisible Cities from Italo Calvino. And he has this one chapter that's literally called The City of Bridges. And I was reading it the first time I went up to Edinburgh, and I remember the moment where I looked out the window and it just had the bridges, and I was like, and ever since then I've loved it. Art is evocative, it's emotional, and I think it's provocative as well. I think if art can get you to stop for a moment, even if it's just a pause, with everything we do in our lives, with all the screens we look at, with all the images we're bombarded at, if you stop for a moment and kind of break that, I think that's what art can give you. Hancock Gallery is great. I think the care that is given to the artists and the clients alike is really, really special. I've worked with a lot of galleries, and there is just a very personable, caring environment. There's a lot of support, I think, for artists. There's a lot of enthusiasm and just general joy that you feel at every interaction, every email, every phone call. Fault Lines is an exhibition about tectonic landscapes, and a lot of them being volcanic. It is about photography, and it's an exploration in the colour and landscape around these very unseen, uncharted kind of spaces. I think Fault Lines for me is about finding your place, and whether or not that means going out into the landscape, reminding us of landscape, or kind of standing on this edge or this precipice. It is a way of grounding, of kind of locating, and I think for me that's the biggest metaphor that a landscape can have, is this kind of displacement and kind of reorientation that we find kind of both within the world and then within ourselves.